Here we go. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in tonight. So as you know, a year ago, we did a story that went viral about a biological girl playing against a biological male, demonstrably unfair, up in Cherokee County in a volleyball match. That was Peyton McNabb, who was spiked in the face so hard by a biological male. We can expect that, right? In the face, that she had neurological damage, which is still ongoing. It completely destroyed her chances of playing in collegial sports, and it really sparked international furor, as well it should have. And really, just because of lots of us getting together, calling out legislators, demanding that, hey, we've got to pass a bill that will protect girls and make sure that they're not, sitting around in their own sports and watching males play. We did it. We passed a Fairness in Women's Sports Act in the legislature, and it was on a bipartisan basis. We are now waiting for a veto override on that, which I'm sure we'll get in the next week. Most Democrats, they don't want this. We know that Republicans do. That's just how it goes politically. But lots of other states besides us have done this. Indiana, Iowa, Missouri. 2 days ago, Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill into law in Texas. In Arizona, Tom Horn, the great Tom Horn, which is a state superintendent we backed during the election. He stood up for girls, and they got together a law and passed it, and now it's in the court system, which it's really, confusing being in the court system. I don't know anything about it, not a lawyer, which is why I have on Cory Brewer. Cory is from the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty. Cory, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Happy to join you.
So you guys you're not just in Wisconsin, you're doing a national push now to defend Title IX issues, but you also have, let's back up, you've got a great project that I love. I wish we would start one here, that it's an education project that holds schools and school boards accountable and transparent and really accountable to people they serve. Tell me a little bit about that.
Right. So just real briefly, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, or WILL for short, we're based here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but we're really expanding to other states. If there are federal constitutional issues, administrative issues, K-12 education issues, we want to kind of fill those gaps and, help people all over the place. So even though we're based here, we do a lot of our work here. We do work in other states as well. But with regard to our project specifically, it's called Restoring American Education. And what really kind of prompted that project was the pandemic, to be honest. Kids were home, they were doing school virtually for the most part, and parents got a peek into the classroom, and a lot of the parents had concerns or they didn't like what they saw. So we wanted to create a project to allow change at the local level. Every state's different in terms of, the political makeup, what kind of state laws will be passed. Here in Wisconsin, we have a kind of a Republican legislature, but we have a Democrat governor. So, maybe we can't get curriculum transparency passed at the state level, but that doesn't mean that the school districts can't do it. And right now, a biggest part of that project are model school board policies. Right now, there's kind of one alternative, one option for the most part out there for when maybe parents, community members, conservative school board members get elected, and then maybe they're running into roadblocks once they're elected, whether that's their fellow board members, the superintendent, the administration, and they don't exactly know what their rights are, what alternatives are out there. So we wanted to kind of use our legal and policy expertise and create some alternative model school board policies to help them know kind of what does pro-parent look like? What is pro-transparency, good governance? What exactly do these things look like? How can I do it in a way that will withstand a legal challenge? And, try to make it as easy as possible for anyone in any state to kind of take a model policy, revise it to meet the needs of your local community, and be able to implement that at the local level.
Okay, great. So the smallest unit of government, you guys, is the school board. And so that's why it's so great to for you guys and others to have like an onboarding, because a lot of times, folks are, here, they're business people, they're teachers or farmers, whoever, and they don't really have the experience. They don't know Robert's rules. They don't know how to, get their elected policies across the finish line. Like you just said, one person can spoil the whole bunch on a school board, so that can happen. But and this is relevant to that as well. And so we've got, when we look at Title IX, and when we look at anything really, we look at it three ways, or down to top to bottom, and it's law, policy, and rule. Law, policy, and rule. And so when we're talking about the big law here, it would be Title IX that governs right now, sadly, a lot of stuff, like who gets to go into the bathrooms, right? Or the locker rooms when there's games, and of course, who gets to play against girls. So tell us a little bit about what Title IX is and what people need to know for their own school.
Yeah, to your first point, that's so true. You get elected to a school board and it's almost like you're running a mini government. And if you don't have that background, there's so many state and federal laws to navigate, one of those being Title IX. So as you mentioned, Title IX is a federal law. So it's actually a law. It was passed by Congress, over 50 years ago now. And really what it was meant to do in a nutshell is give girls and boys equal opportunities in educational activities. It's most often referenced in sports, but it's really any educational activity. And pretty much for the whole time that Title IX has been in effect, folks have understood sex to mean boys and girls. Now, below, as you had mentioned, that federal law, there are also federal regulations. So the Department of Education looks at that federal law and they can make federal regulations to implement that law. And, the Trump administration actually just did that in 2020. So these Title IX regs were recently updated. That's kind of an initial question that a lot of folks had when they heard the Biden admin was going to update them again. Why? We just looked at all of these things. But what the Biden administration has indicated that they plan to do, and we were expecting a final rule on this in May, but there were about 250,000 public comments on the rule, and the department took longer than they expected to go through all of those. So now they're expecting a final rule in October. So as I describe any of this, just know that these are not in effect yet. They don't have the force of law. So if there's any school board members listening in and you're being pressured to kind of change your policies, you don't have to do that right now. These are not final. They don't have the force of law. And kind of the biggest change that's expected once they are final are to add gender identity into the meaning of sex discrimination. So right now, Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. Pretty straightforward. The Biden administration has indicated that they want that to mean sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and a few other related categories. And frankly, we think that conflicts with the text of the law, and it kind of flips Title IX on its head and eviscerates its initial purpose. And when you get into the issue of sports, that hurts girls. It ultimately hurts girls and people across the political spectrum, not always, but this is an issue that a lot of people tend to agree with. It's kind of a common sense issue that there should be girls' sports and boys' sports.
Right. It's if we're getting political here, and I don't like to, but if we're polling people, right, on voters, is generally the poll sample. I think it's on par with 70%, which is a lot, right? That's Americans can't agree on a lot of things, but I think this is kind of a no-brainer. So if you're listening out there and you're thinking, I'd like to run for office and I'm playing around with what do I make this an issue or not? Again, I'd like to point out our bill here in North Carolina, I believe 3 Democrats also voted for it. And the reason is they're hearing from their constituents that, look, some of our rural counties, those families don't have the money to send their child to college. So, some folks that, swimmers or soccer players or whatever, if they're bringing boys on, what the heck is the point? And so that's kind of, that's just a common thing that we hear all the time. We're seeing, legislation you're talking about is also, when we look at healthcare, also going into the healthcare world where, doctors' offices are now saying, wow, we're going to be forced to, affirm someone's identity when 99% of doctors know, yeah, I'm going to follow the science, and the outward manifestations of sex, they're pretty apparent, and we're going to follow that. And maybe they're also going to be forced to cave into this woke anti-science nonsense.
Yeah, I think, talking about it being an issue that has a lot of support. There's a lot of common sense. You see states like North Carolina taking action to protect girls' sports, and that shows that folks recognize an inherent biological difference between girls and boys. I think there's over 20 states now that have laws like this, and they're recognizing that not only is it a safety concern to allow boys to play on girls' teams or against girls, but there's also fairness and competition issues. One of the things in the proposed athletics Title IX rules is you can't have a categorical ban that separates sports by girls' teams and boys' teams. You might, this is just paraphrasing, but they kind of say, well, there might be times in competitive sports, like in high school and college, where you can balance the interest, and then maybe you can put some regulations there, but definitely not in elementary school, because that's not competitive.
So let's go back. What you just said is the new regulations upcoming. We can look for them saying it is now unlawful to delineate between female and male sports. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what the proposed regulations say. So there's actually,
we have no Title IX. Then there is no Title IX anymore.
It undermines the purpose of Title IX. Yes, I think it absolutely does. And there's two sets of proposed Title IX regulations. One are kind of the non-athletics version, where I talked about adding in gender identity to the meaning of sex discrimination. And then they said, the Department of Education said, well, that doesn't include athletics. That one's coming later. Well, they did issue a proposed Title IX rule on athletics later, and that's the one that we're talking about, where they said you can't have a categorical ban. You can't separate teams by girls and boys, period. That won't fly under the new rules. But a lot of organizations, Will has kind of picked up on this, a few others have as well, have realized, well, okay, under the general rules, if we can't interpret sex to mean sex, meaning male and female, if we have to interpret sex to include gender identity, then how does that not include athletics? And when you get down to the local level, those district administrators, athletic coordinators, how are they supposed to navigate this? I think it just makes it so hard at the local level for them to navigate this. They're considering, the fairness, the safety, the privacy in the girls' locker rooms. And I think of the people that oppose having boys sports and girls sports, they don't necessarily always want to have that conversation about what does this mean for girls? How can we navigate this in a way that is respectful to all students and protects girls and protects girls sports? And I think we absolutely need to have that conversation.
Well, I have an idea. How about Title IX? Before 15 minutes ago, when they wanted to give our rights away to boys, because that's what's happening. I read an article the other day, this is sort of related, that the highest paid woman, the highest paid executive in the world, maybe the country, the world, is a man. Color me shocked. Right? I mean, honest to God. I mean, are there, what's left, right? And I have to say that this movement unfairly maligns the gay movement, the movement for civil rights, the Stonewall movement for LGBTQ people. When you talk to gay people, they don't want this. Moreover, they don't want this to be their cause. So, guys, we're talking about, and as usual, we're talking about a tiny minority of an already marginalized community, right? That's making all this racket, and there's unfair malignment of those groups. And so I've seen people like, obviously, Caitlyn Jenner and others Martina Navratilova is an openly gay woman, doesn't like this. So there's, it's just common sense, right, Cory?
It is. I think that's the easiest way to put it, is that this is common sense. And I've heard similar frustrations, and I absolutely understand why those frustrations are there. And like you said, the answer to this is arguably Title IX. This is what creates equal opportunities for girls and boys in educational activities, including sports. And because of that, once these rules are final, expected in the fall, I expect a slew of litigation all over the country. There's going to be states now that probably will have state laws conflicting with what the federal government is saying you need to do. The regulations arguably are going to conflict with the text of the law itself. There's religious liberty concerns, there's free speech concerns, there's even due process concerns, because the way that sexual harassment is going to be addressed is expected to change. So even once these rules do go into effect, they might get enjoined by courts. This is something that will be following closely and providing updates on. I'm sure several other similar organizations will as well. But they're going to be fought, because there are a lot of groups out there, a lot of parents, a lot of school board members, and people that are advocating for girls' sports and equal opportunities, and for Title IX not to be changed in the way that this administration is proposing.
So guys, I want to tell you this: when it comes to public interest law, and that means, if you can think of it on the other side, let's see, an analog to what you guys do on the other side would be ACLU, right? So the leftists have them in spades. We have but a few. And that's, Cory, where I'm going to have you guys on a lot. We work with school boards, probably in 45 counties, of 100 here in North Carolina. And that's why you guys are going to be an integral part to what we're doing, because we want to have legal teams in place to challenge these things. So here's how it works. Whenever a law happens, let's just take the state house, right? A law, and we hear this a lot, comes down, and everyone will say, well, gosh, there's this loophole and that loophole and this loophole. Laws are supposed to be intentionally broad. It is through case law that laws get refined and becomes really what you live by. Right. And so that's why I don't want a major freak out to these, probably what an executive order or whatever it's going to be, because lawsuits are part of the process. Lawsuits aren't always bad, right? It's part of the lawmaking process where, Biden will do something constitutional, which is all day, every day, several times a day. And then the courts will have to come back and say, not going to do that. So am I right? Is that an accurate description? Is it the lawsuits play a part of this?
Lawsuits absolutely play a part of this. There's the, statutory law. What does Congress enact, or what does your state legislature enact? And then there's case law, as you mentioned. If there's a dispute over what a law means, how it's being implemented, then, you can sue over it, and a court will make a determination. And it kind of can go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. So when we're talking about these Title IX and related issues, even though these Title IX regs are not final yet, they don't have the force of law, there are related issues that are kind of coming up through the courts. Can you separate bathrooms in schools by boys and girls? Are these state laws constitutional that separate by boys and girls? And we expect to see decisions in different parts of the country. And if any of those decisions conflict, then you have a circuit split, and it's likely that eventually the United States Supreme Court is going to address these issues. So it'll be kind of a long process, something worth following. We'll be following it and continuing to provide updates. We're exploring being involved in it as well. And, when public interest law firms, for Will in particular, we're blessed to be able to represent our clients at no cost. So we fight for freedom, we fight for, limited and appropriate government, and we follow the Constitution and the principles in our Constitution. And we love doing that. All of our attorneys here love to do that. And we're really grateful. People should feel free to reach out to us. If we're not able to help, we'll always, try to make a connection with another similar, individual or firm, but it's at no cost to the client. So we're very grateful to be able to do the work that we do.
Right. I'm going to put your information up here in a second, but I want to tell all of you that are listening, I'm going to make this very clear. So listen to me, calm your chatter in your mind, do whatever you need to do. Listen to me. If we do not win the AG race here in North Carolina, we are done. DUN done. Let me tell you why. We are in the Fourth Circuit. Fourth Circuit now in the court system, the federal level, it's sort of like the Ninth Circuit in the days of yore. The Ninth Circuit, like 10, 12 years ago. It's super, super liberal and very inhospitable to the kind of challenges we're talking about, right? So we need, and we have a far left right now in Josh Stein, a far left attorney general. So we need a fighter in that role, and one that is going to sue and pick up the mantle to protect the civil rights of girls and others. And so we need to have that in addition to having our resources at will. And I'm going to put this up right now on the screen. This is their website. This is how you get a hold of them. And again, to be able to do this and fight in the public interest, particularly when it's on upholding the Constitution and not lighting it on fire, right? We have a very precious few law firms. So I encourage you to donate. They survive on donations. They need donations to carry the mantle forward. Because again, when they come down with these prescriptions, we don't have the AG's office. We're in trouble. Now we do have it, and Cory, we can defy that law, right, and go to court.
Could you ask your question again? I want to be able to respond accurately.
Let's say those regs come down. So it's kind of like the Bostock decision, right? Which happened, and then the Biden administration came up with regulations that were ambiguous about, are girls allowed to be in the boys' bathroom, vice versa, or not? And a lot of school districts here in the state clamped down and said, "Oh, we have to follow this," right? Mm-hmm. In large part because we're in the Fourth Circuit and we've got a Democrat at the helm of the AG. But if these regulations that are, as you said, not legally binding, right? They're just a dear colleague letter, whatever.
Right.
Yes. So if we've got a Republican in there and the Republican says, listen, this isn't law and we're not going to follow this, et cetera, and damn the torpedoes, and I'm going to fight for this, we're going to be in a better position, you guys, to go forward, because we know we've got an AG that will fight for this. We're talking about allowing boys into girls' restrooms. Now, if you're thinking about third and fourth graders, may not be, a big deal. I would argue the other side, but whatever. When you're thinking 13 and 14-year-olds and the strength differences and the size differences and the hormone differences, very, very big deal. So we've got a fighter.
I think I would add two things to that. First, you mentioned Bostock. That applied in the employment context. And I'm sure you know this, a lot of your listeners know this, but they specifically said that this is interpretation to include gender identity and sex. This is in Title VII employment context land, but it's being used to change Title IX. And I think that's going to be part of the argument. And then the second thing I just wanted to touch on is, we at Will are a nonpartisan organization, so we're not advocating for any, political client candidate or any particular law. But a lot of times, if we don't make a public policy recommendation or get involved in litigation, then you're absolutely right. Sometimes the best way to get what you want done, advocate for what you want to be done, is political. Sometimes the solution is political. So, whether that's at the state level, the local level, if you're looking at your local school board, sometimes that's the best way to, promote parents' rights, protect girls' sports. You want more transparency and open government. So there are all these different avenues to kind of accomplish those goals.
Right, which should never be political. Never be political. So I just want to make this clear. Ed First Alliance, we are a political organization, but we have lots of nonpartisan organizations on, because, right, we view these things as not really political, but our view is a little bit different than some of the guests we have on, and we totally understand that. But and it is too bad that this has become political for some. Right. right? Because
Right.
when we get into the community, we mix it up with people in the community, et cetera, and we're like, hey, do you want a do you want a boy in the girls' bathroom? And a father will say to me, would you like to see someone's teeth on the floor? Right? And I have no idea if he votes, what he, what side of the
Yeah.
aisle on. It's pretty universal. And I
Right.
think the things we're talking about are pretty doggone common
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Common sense is the best way to put it. Um, whether it's girls' sports, boys and girls' bathrooms, it shouldn't be political. It shouldn't be controversial. We should be able to have these conversations to protect our girls, respect all students. And I think there's a way to do that. And I completely disagree, with this is me personally, not necessarily my organization, but with the way that the Biden administration is approaching this. There's just so many questions, so many concerns. And I think, that's why we're exploring getting involved. Don't know exactly what aspect of it will be yet, but, we want to protect girls and their equal opportunities in education and just uphold what that federal law, Title IX, says.
Right. I mean, these guys are acting like Boko Haram, basically, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but hey, forget about the girls, et cetera. They're going to be subservient to the males. And I don't mean that as hyperbole. And I think when you look at the movement, this has been going on in the UK for quite a while. And we're kind of 5 years back. But I mean, if you look at some of these rallies, this is how nuts it is. It's a rally for women, by women, for women's rights. And you got 10 dudes that slap on eyeliner, big muscle dudes that go up to these rallies with baseball bats. Now, you tell me this is about equal rights and acceptance. That's literally what's happening. And so, and it's not even hyperbole. I mean, we know on a minor scale what happened in Loudoun County in the rights violations. And so, we're talking about not only, we're talking about upholding civilization itself in addition to the Constitution.
Yeah, we had an incident that we were involved in here in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, where this is one of those things where people say if you oppose these rules and these laws allowing, gender identity to be included within the meaning of sex, well, you're hateful then. And if you have some extreme example, that's never going to happen. Well, we had an incident in Sun Prairie where unfortunately these 4 freshman girls were taking a shower after their swim unit in gym class. They had their swimsuits on. That's what they always did. They just rinsed off. And an 18-year-old biologically male student approached them in their shower in the girls' locker room and said, "I'm trans, by the way," completely undressed and showered right next to these girls. And we've asked the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education to investigate that school district because we don't think the way they handled it was appropriate. And we don't think that the way they're, implementing Title IX right now adequately protects girls' privacy, and not just the girls in that incident, but in the district overall. And the other thing too is I have 3 little girls myself. I don't want to see them ever have to go through anything like that. It was unwelcome conduct. And, for all the generations of girls in these schools, they shouldn't have to go through that. They should know when they're in their bathroom, in their locker room, that is their private space. They're safe and they have privacy. And, we're willing to get involved. Not everyone wants to have these conversations, but they're important conversations to have.
Yeah, it's very, very traumatic what you just told me. Very traumatic for those who are involved. And I'll just leave everyone with this. To your point, a lot of this debate that's going on, you're going to be gaslit like you have never been gaslit before. And I find it hilarious that people say, well, why do you have to make a law about this? Well, when people act a fool, they're going to get a fool's reward. I mean, this is going to lead to people, vigilantes, etc. We need a law to protect both sides because, if 12-year-old, 13-year-old boys are being told that it's okay to do this, it's clearly not okay with a lot of parents. And there needs to be laws are there to restore order as well as uphold the Constitution. I think that's what we're talking about. So, Cory, thank you for coming on and telling us what we have to look forward to, what insanity we need to prepare for. And I'm looking forward to working with you guys. I know our whole team is, and thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.